Imagine you are a king who must convince the people that before you there was only chaos and savagery. There is no opposition, no free press. The country breathes at your command, and the priests preach your divine election. Yet across the land, the earth is dotted with polygonal walls and balancing boulders, structures that could not have been erected by humans of your stature and strength. These are not just stones, they are proof of the existence of a unified, powerful empire that commanded logistics and resources unavailable to you even in your dreams. These megaliths scream that before your progressive reign, there was a world where granite was molded like clay. If people learn of this, they will understand that you are not a savior, but a jailer, hiding the knowledge of their ancestors from them. What will you choose? To honestly tell the people that we have lost great technologies and have fallen into the Middle Ages, or to concoct a tale of patience and hard work so that no one ever searches for the true builders? Now let's see how it looked in real history. You are told that in the 15th century, several dozen Orthodox monks on a remote island in the White Sea manually cut, processed, and laid tens of thousands of granite blocks, weighing between 5 and 10 tons each. Moreover, they did this so skillfully that the seams between the stones are virtually invisible, and the edges are polished to a mirror shine. And all of this was achieved without modern technology, without diamond saws, and without cranes. Just prayer, patience, and a chisel. Open the map of the Solovetsky Islands. Find the system of waterways. There are 90 of them, 90 channels connecting the lakes. Now take a look at the structure of these channels. Many of them are covered by massive granite arches. The blocks are laid in several rows. Each stone is worked as if it were cut in a factory with a laser. Right angles, smooth edges, perfect fitting together. And now calculate. 90 channels. Let's assume there are, on average, 100 large blocks in each channel. That's 9,000 stones. But this is the minimum estimate, as many channels are longer and wider. The actual figure could be double that. So we're talking about at least 10,000 multi-ton blocks. In an era when granite was processed manually, one block measuring 2 by 1 meter required 200 to 300 person-hours of work. That's months of labor for a single stone. If you take 10,000 blocks and calculate the total time, it amounts to millions of person-hours. Divide this by the number of monks in the monastery, even if there were 100 of them, and it would seem that the construction should have taken centuries. However, according to the official version, the monastery was built in just a few decades in the 15th century. It doesn't add up. It just doesn't happen that way. The most obvious explanation is that the monks used the labor of peasants. Okay, then where did all those people on the island come from? The Solovetsky Islands are not part of the mainland. You can only get there by sea. Bringing thousands of workers, providing them with housing, food, tools. This is a logistics operation of colossal scale. Where are the traces of this operation? Where are the barracks? Where are the tool depots? Where are the documents regarding food supplies? None of this exists. Now look further. Open the photographs of the Solovetsky canals. Pay attention to one detail. In the foreground, you can see the brickwork. Regular red bricks, clearly much later. And in the background are those very granite blocks. Perfectly rectangular, laid in 2 rows high. The seams between them are so narrow that you can't even slip a knife blade through. A strange combination. The brick looks like a rough patch, a primitive addition to something much more ancient and technological. If the builders had initially planned the whole canal, they would have laid it either entirely in brick or entirely in granite. Why mix materials? Why expend immense effort on processing granite blocks only to then add simple brick to them? It looks like brick is a form of repair. The monks restored something much older. They found a partially destroyed system of canals and rebuilt it with what they could. Brick is readily available and can be fired on site. But they didn't know how to work with granite. So they used what was already there. And this is where it gets really interesting. Many granite blocks are underwater. They are not visible from the surface. They lie on the bottom of the channel, forming its foundation. Why polish and refine stones that will end up underwater? It seems like unnecessary work. If you're building a foundation that no one will see, you would use rough stone. But here, each block is finished as if it were being prepared for the grand facade of a palace. So, these blocks were originally not meant to lie underwater. They were part of some other structure, possibly above ground. The monks simply used the ready stones for their needs, laying them in the foundation of the canals. But if these blocks were not made by monks, then who did? And most importantly, how did they end up on an island that has no large quarries? There are no large-scale traces of granite mining on the Solovetsky Islands. There is a small quarry, but it could not have supplied such a quantity of stone. To carve out tens of thousands of blocks, a huge quarry is needed. Access roads, storage facilities, and infrastructure are required. Nothing of the sort exists on the island. Version: the blocks were brought from the mainland. But how? Transporting 10-ton loads across the open sea on 15th-century ships is a gamble. One storm, and the entire cargo goes to the bottom. To deliver 10,000 blocks, thousands of trips would be required. And again, the question of logistics arises. Where are the documents? Where are the accounts from contemporaries about this massive operation? They are not there. The history of the monastery recounts the feats of saints, miracles, and prayers. But there is no engineering documentation. It seems that the monks really came to something that was already prepared. They discovered a system of channels, partially silted and partially destroyed. They restored it as much as they could. They added their own elements, bricks, wooden bridges, and they called it their construction. Meanwhile, the true creators of this system remained unknown. And the Solovetsky Islands are not the only place like this. Megaliths are scattered around the world, which official history tries to explain as having ritual purposes, religious fervor, or the hard work of ancient peoples. But once you start to count, the narrative falls apart. The numbers don't add up. The logistics don't work. The technologies are absent. So, the explanation needs to be sought in another direction. Let's take a look at the other end of the planet. China, Jiangsu Province, Yanshan Mountain. Here lies an ancient quarry, where, according to the official version, the last works were carried out in the 15th century. About the same time the monastery was being built in Solovki. Coincidence? Perhaps. But what is this quarry? Inside lie 3 gigantic megaliths. Not unshaped boulders that nature has scattered as it pleased. No, these are carved parallel pipeds with clear, straight edges. Geometric figures that clearly were not created by wind or water. The mass of each megalith is over 1,000 tons. By comparison, The largest blocks in Baalbek weigh around 800 tons and are considered a marvel of ancient engineering. Here, the stones are even heavier, and there are 3 of them. They just lie in the quarry, as if someone started carving them and then abandoned the work halfway through. Why did they abandon it? The official version says that they realized it was too heavy to move. This is a rational explanation, until you start to think about it. People carve stone weighing 1,000 tons. This takes months, or rather years, of labor. They create perfectly even edges and straight angles. This requires immense effort and precise calculations. And only after completing the work do they suddenly realize, oh, we won't be able to move it? Any reasonable person would understand this even before it began. Why waste years if you already know that the result is unusable? It's like building a house without a front door and then being surprised that you can't get in. It's not logical. That means either they planned to move these masses in some way, or they weren't planning to move them at all. Modern cranes can lift a maximum of 300 to 400 tons. To move a block weighing 1,000 tons, special equipment is needed, which is used in the construction of nuclear power plants or bridges over wide rivers. There are very few of such machines in the world, and in the 15th century, they didn't exist at all. Let's say they decided to roll on wooden rollers. Wooden logs under the stone, horses pulling, workers pushing. The classic version for textbooks. Then a road is needed. Wide, sturdy, capable of withstanding a monstrous load. And the quarry is located on a mountain 140 meters high. Lowering 1,000 tons down a slope is suicide. The slightest misstep and the stone will crush everyone nearby. Controlling such a mass with wooden levers is impossible. Okay, maybe they didn't lower it, but raised it? Cut it at the bottom and then dragged it up? Even worse. Lifting 1,000 tons uphill without motors and hydraulics is truly fantasy. And where is the road? Where are the traces of this operation? The quarry has existed for hundreds of years. If there were works of such scale, there should be marks from rollers, reinforced sections of the slope, remnants of supports. There is nothing of the sort. Maybe they didn't intend to move the blocks as whole pieces. Perhaps they planned to cut them on site? But then, why carve out a huge chunk from the mountain only to cut it back into smaller pieces later? It would be easier to just cut out many small blocks right away. Less work, more efficiency. No matter how you look at it, the explanation doesn't add up. There is another version. The stone was plastic at the moment of carving. It wasn't cut in the usual sense. It was shaped. It was softened with a special composition or heated to a state close to clay. Then it was given the desired form. After that, the material solidified, turning into hard stone. It sounds fantastic, but let's take a look at the walls of the quarry. They show signs of tools, grooves, scratches. Historians say these are traces of manual labor, that people scraped the stone with primitive tools. But take a closer look. These grooves are not parallel. They are chaotic, as if someone has smudged the material. This looks more like the marks left from working with a soft mass than scratches from an iron chisel on hard stone. Limestone, which makes up the Yan Mountain, easily softens under the influence of certain temperatures or chemical substances. There are modern studies showing that when heated to a specific temperature and with the addition of special components, the limestone becomes plastic. After cooling, it hardens again, but in a new form. If the ancients possessed such technology, then everything falls into place. There's no need to cut hard stone. There's no need to haul multi-ton blocks. You simply soften the rock right in the quarry, shape the needed parts, let them harden. Done. Too simple. Too effective. But then another question arises. If the technology was so advanced, why did the 3 megaliths remain lying in the quarry? Why wasn't the work completed? Perhaps something happened. An event that interrupted the process. A catastrophe. A war. Climate change. Something that compelled them to abandon unfinished projects and leave. And now for the strangest part. Look at the quarry from above. Huge excavations in the rock are visible. Entire sections of the mountain have been cut out and removed. Where did this volume of stone go? Researchers have calculated that in just one part of the quarry, enough rock has been removed to create 13 megaliths comparable in size that currently lie there. Where are these 13 blocks? Where is all the stone that has been extracted from the mountain? There are no large structures nearby. There's the Shaolin Mausoleum a few kilometers away. There, statues made from the same stone stand. But the volume of those statues barely reaches even 1% of what has been carved out of the quarry. Many will now write, "The locals have taken everything for construction materials." Fine. Then answer one question. Where are the mountains of stone shavings? Cutting limestone into blocks produces waste, stone dust, scraps, defective pieces. One block generates dozens of kilograms of waste. If hundreds of blocks have been cut, there should be tons of debris left behind. There is none of it. It is more logical to assume otherwise. The stone was transported far away, hundreds of kilometers. They built cities from it, large, technologically advanced cities. And then a catastrophe occurred. The cities were destroyed, buried under soil, clay, and debris flows. What survived was taken apart by new settlers for their needs, and the traces of large-scale construction disappeared beneath the cultural layer. This explains why there is a significant lack of rock volume in the quarry. It went into the construction of a civilization that official history now prefers to overlook. A civilization that possessed technologies we still cannot replicate. The quarry of Yanshan is not the only one. In Baalbek, Lebanon, there is also a quarry. There are blocks weighing 800 and 900 tons. Recently, excavations were conducted, and it was found that there are more of the same blocks beneath them. This means that the work was done in several stages. First, the lower blocks were cut out, then the upper ones. But it was never completed. Why cut blocks of such large size at all? Why not make them smaller to make it easier to work with? Any sensible builder will say that it's more convenient to handle blocks weighing several tons than just a few hundred. Less risk, more flexibility in work. But they were cutting giant blocks, as if size mattered, as if only such masses could fulfill the function for which they were created. And now look at the Baalbek complex from above, a massive platform. At its base are blocks weighing 800 tons. Why such strength? What was meant to stand on this platform that required such a powerful foundation? Officially, this is a temple complex. Supposedly, the Romans built the temples of Jupiter and Bacchus. However, the Roman structures are the upper layers, which are more recent. They are built on a platform that is clearly older. And this platform is designed to bear loads that an ordinary temple could not create. It looks as if there was something else there originally, something heavy, or something that created strong vibrations for which a massive base was required. Then that structure either collapsed or was dismantled, and the platform remained. Many centuries later, temples were built on it, making use of the ready foundation. An interesting detail. Look at the material from which the walls of the complex are made in the places where they are damaged. It is not solid stone. It resembles poor quality concrete, weakly bound gravel, as if someone mixed stone chips with a binder, poured it into a mold, and let it set. If the blocks weighing 800 tons are cast right on the spot, then there's no need to move them. You prepare the mix, pour it into the formwork, and wait for it to set. Much simpler than hauling a finished block over dozens of kilometers. But such technology requires knowledge. One must understand which components to mix, at what temperature, and in what proportions. This is not a primitive craft. It is high-level engineering. And if this technology existed, then there must have been a civilization that possessed it. A civilization capable of creating megaliths not through brute force, but through precise calculation. But where is it now? Why are there only scattered traces left of it? Now let's move even further. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as the locals call it. Everyone knows about the giant stone heads, the moai statues. They are featured in every travel guide. But few pay attention to another detail of the island. On the eastern coast, in the Vinipu area, the remains of 3 platforms have been preserved. They are called ahu. The walls of these platforms are built from massive stone blocks, fitted together without gaps. The seams are almost invisible. The masonry technique is an exact copy of what can be seen in Peru. The walls of Sacsayhuaman, the Incan fortress near Cusco. Polygonal masonry, where each stone has a complex, irregular shape but fits perfectly with the neighboring stones. No mortar. The stones hold together due to precise fitting. Between Easter Island and Peru, there are 4,000 kilometers of open ocean. Official history claims that the inhabitants of Rapa Nui arrived on the island in small boats from Polynesia. They did not have sea vessels capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean. Therefore, there could not have been any contact with South America. How can we explain the identity of construction technologies? 2 peoples, separated by thousands of kilometers of water and having no connection with each other, suddenly begin to build walls in the same way. Moreover, in an incredibly complex manner. They don't just stack stones on top of each other, they carve them into intricate polygons so that they fit together like puzzle pieces. Coincidence? How many coincidences are needed to recognize a pattern? Look at the details. On Easter Island, as well as in Peru, they use the technique of wedging. A small stone is placed between the large blocks, securing the entire structure. This is not just a decorative element, it is an engineering solution that enhances the stability of the masonry against earthquakes. In both cases, the stones have no sharp corners. All the edges are slightly rounded. This is not a coincidence. Sharp corners are a weak point. They chip easily. Rounded edges distribute the load more evenly. Someone knew this and applied it deliberately. Researchers have long debated how contact could have occurred between Easter Island and South America. Some say the Polynesians managed to reach the continent. Others suggest that the inhabitants of South America sailed to the island. A third group simply throws up their hands and attributes it all to coincidence. But there is a simpler explanation. This is not the contact between two peoples. These are the remnants of a single civilization that built in both places. A civilization that possessed a naval fleet and a unified architectural standard. It erected structures on different continents using the same technologies. And this civilization existed not thousands of years ago, but much later. Perhaps only a few centuries ago. Then something happened that destroyed it. New peoples settled on the ruins, who no longer understood how it was built. Take a look at the Moai, the famous heads of Easter Island. They are called heads, although many of them have bodies buried in the ground. Excavations have revealed that some statues extend several meters underground. They were not deliberately buried. They were covered by soil. Only the head is visible on the surface, while everything else is concealed by soil. And on these underground parts, drawings and ornaments have been preserved. Why adorn something that will end up buried? It doesn't make sense. So, at the time of creation, these parts were at the surface. The statues stood completely above the ground. Then something happened that raised the ground level by several meters. A volcanic eruption, a mud flow, a tsunami that brought a massive amount of silt and sand. The island has active volcanoes. Eruptions have occurred multiple times. One of them could have covered the statues with ash and lava crumbs. And if that happened, it means the disaster interrupted life on the island. Those who built the platforms and carved the idols either perished or left. And after some time, new settlers arrived on the island. They found ready-made structures, some partially destroyed, others partially buried. They began to use them, unaware of who had built them and why. A similar picture is found everywhere. Megaliths are scattered across the planet, and everywhere the same scenario unfolds. Grand structures, unclear purposes, signs of a sudden halt in construction, as if the builders abandoned everything in an instant and vanished. There is another category of oddities that is seldom discussed. Balancing rocks. Huge boulders resting on tiny supports. Sometimes a multi-ton mass balances on an area of just a few square centimeters. Look at the photos. Urgaki in Russia. National parks in the USA. India. It's the same everywhere. A massive stone that, by all laws of physics, should have collapsed at the first earthquake, stands peacefully for centuries. Official geology explains this as erosion. They say that wind and water have worn down the rock for millions of years, and by chance, a stable structure formed. But that doesn't hold up. Erosion creates chaos, not order. It wears down protrusions, rounds edges, and makes surfaces uneven. But to accidentally create a structure that is in perfect balance is like saying the wind painted a Rembrandt on a rock. Theoretically possible, but the probability approaches zero. Moreover, there are many such balancing stones. If it were just a coincidence, they would be found only in singular instances. But there are hundreds of them all over the world. This means it's not a coincidence. It is the result of someone's actions. Who could have placed a multi-ton boulder on a small support with millimeter precision? Modern engineers with cranes and sensors could do that. But why? And how did the ancients manage it when, according to the official version, they had nothing but ropes and levers? There is a version that this is a demonstration of technology, a way to show we can manipulate huge masses. We can place a stone in such a way that it won't fall, even if the surface area of support is smaller than a palm. It's not magic. It's knowledge of physics and precise calculations. But for such precision, tools are needed. It is necessary to measure the center of gravity of the boulder. Calculate the point where it should be supported. Make sure that the support surface is strictly horizontal. The slightest mistake and the stone will collapse. Doing this by hand is practically impossible, but the stones remain. Now think about this. Geologists say that these stones are millions of years old. But in that time, there must have been thousands of earthquakes. Even small tremors, 3 or 4 on the Richter scale, create vibrations that shift objects. A balancing stone weighing 100 tons, standing on an area of 10 square centimeters, should fall with the first push. It cannot remain stable for millions of years. This is physically impossible. So these stones are much younger, perhaps a few hundred years, maybe even less. And if that's the case, then the last major cataclysm occurred recently. After it, these stones remained standing because there were no more powerful tremors. If a global earthquake or pole shift occurred only a few centuries ago, then it makes sense why the balancing stones are still in place. They were either set up after the catastrophe or survived it because they ended up in an area where the tremors were weaker. But official science categorically denies recent cataclysms. The official version claims that the last ice age ended 12,000 years ago, and since then, the planet has lived peacefully. No global upheavals. Everything has been measured and gradual. How can we explain the cultural layer that has buried the ground floors of buildings all over the world? How can we explain the discoveries of sunken cities at the bottoms of seas? How can we explain that many ancient structures ended up buried under meters of soil? Maybe not everything is as peaceful as we are told. Modern artists balance stones with their hands. There are even competitions for this form of art. People choose small boulders weighing 10 to 20 kilograms and find the point of balance. The stones stand for several hours, sometimes even days. Then they fall due to wind or rain. But in nature, there are stones balancing that weigh 50, 100, 200 tons, and they stand for years. The difference in scale is thousands of times. If a person can lift a stone weighing 20 kilograms, to lift a stone weighing 200 tons, one either needs tools that we do not have, or possesses strength that we do not possess, or to be beings for whom 200 tons is the same as 20 kilograms is for us. That is, to be 10 times larger and stronger. Giants. Legends about them exist in all cultures. The Bible mentions the Nephilim. Greek myths are filled with titans. Scandinavian sagas tell of Jotuns. Indian Vedas speak of Rakshasas. It's always the same, a race of enormous beings that lived before us. Official science considers this to be nonsense. They claim that there were no giants. Humans have always been the same size. All findings of giant skeletons are either hoaxes or dinosaur bones that were mistakenly identified as human. But architecture tells a different story. Doors 7 meters high, steps that are uncomfortable to climb, megaliths that cannot be moved by modern technology. All of this is designed for beings much larger than us. And if these creatures really existed, where did they go? Why do we only have their structures left, but no skeletons? Either they were deliberately destroyed, or they left, or they became extinct due to a catastrophe. And we arrived later. We settled in their cities. We use their roads. We live in their houses, having renovated them to fit our size. And we tell ourselves stories about how all of this was built by our ancestors with their own hands. But stones do not lie. They silently stand and wait for us to finally ask the right questions. Now let's take a look at Arvat Island off the coast of Syria. A small island located 3 kilometers from the city of Tartus. Densely populated, completely built up. And amidst this construction, a fragment of an ancient wall made of megalithic blocks has been preserved. Not a whole wall, just a piece. The rest has disappeared. Where to? Presumably, this wall surrounded the entire island. Such fortifications were built for protection against enemies or natural disasters. But now, only a small section remains. A few blocks stacked on top of each other. Each weighs several tons. Where are the others? Officially, it's said that the locals dismantled the wall and used the stones to build houses. It sounds reasonable until you remember the tools of that era. In the 18th and 19th centuries, when supposedly dismantling the wall, hand saws were used for cutting stone, an iron blade with teeth. To saw one granite block in half, it takes 3 to 4 days of continuous work by 2 people. The blade wears out, and it's replaced every few hours. A family could saw a maximum of 20 to 30 blocks in a year. On the island live several hundred families. If they all worked together to saw a wall, it would take them decades. And that's if they worked constantly, without getting distracted by fishing, fields, or daily life. Where are the traces of this industrial process? Where are the hundreds of worn-out saws? Where are the foundations of houses made from heavy stone blocks? Nothing like this exists. The wall simply disappeared, as if someone took it away and removed the blocks. There is another version. The wall was destroyed by a tsunami. A massive wave hit the island, tearing blocks from the foundation and carrying them off to sea. Indeed, stone debris has been found on the seabed around the island. However, their quantity does not match what should have been in the complete wall surrounding the island. So some of the blocks were swept away, while others simply went underwater with changes in sea level. The Mediterranean Sea has not always been like it is now. Its level has changed. What was once a shore or even dry land is now submerged. If the wall was built when the sea level was lower, it means the island was larger. It may have even been connected to the mainland. And the wall protected not the island, but a part of the coastline. Then the water levels rose, perhaps due to the melting of glaciers, perhaps due to tectonic shifts. Part of the wall ended up underwater, and what remained above the surface gradually crumbled away due to the waves and the passage of time. But here's what's interesting. Delivering such massive blocks to the island is technically very challenging. Even now, transporting a multi-ton load across 3 kilometers of sea is no simple task. A barge, a crane, and special equipment are required. And in ancient times, when, according to the official version, there was nothing but rowboats, how did they transport blocks weighing several tons to an island where there is no stone of such quality? It's more logical to assume that the blocks were there originally. They weren't brought to the island. The island became an island later. It was once a peninsula or part of the mainland. The wall was built on land. Then the water rose, cutting off the area from the shore, and it turned into an island. This means that the wall is much older than we are told. It was built before the sea level changed, and this could only have happened during the last major climate change. And if there was a flood, if sea levels really rose quickly and sharply, then many coastal cities ended up underwater. Their ruins now lie on the seabed. We find them by chance, declaring them sunken harbors or the result of earthquakes. But maybe these are remnants of the civilization that existed before the catastrophe. Now let's return to the Solovetsky Monastery and look at it from a different perspective. The monastery's archives hold ancient illustrations. They depict biblical scenes, but with interesting details. Above, there is a figure surrounded by clouds and angels. Officially, this is the Lord. But take a closer look at the angels. They have wings, but they don't resemble bird wings. They are more like stylized representations of mechanisms, something that resembles propellers or engines. And the angels themselves are depicted in strange garments that resemble spacesuits or protective suits more than anything else. And in their hands, they hold not harps, but objects resembling tools or weapons. One could say this is a convention of medieval art. Artists did not know how to depict things realistically, so they represented everything symbolically. But then, why do these symbols resemble technical devices so closely? Below, on the ground, there are people depicted. They are small compared to the figures above, a clear hierarchy. Those at the top govern, those at the bottom obey. This is not a religious allegory. This is documentation, an image of real events, merely encrypted in symbols that future generations will interpret as mysticism. Angels with wings are pilots of flying machines. Clouds are not a celestial sphere, but a designation of airspace. The figure in the center is not a deity, but a representative of the highest hierarchy. The commander, the coordinator, the one who gives orders. And the people below are workers, builders, employees. They carry out the tasks assigned to them from above. They construct buildings, lay channels, work with stone. If you look at the illustrations from this perspective, much becomes clear. The Solovetsky Monastery is not just a religious center. It is a base, a communication point with those who were higher up in the hierarchy. Giant megaliths, the mysterious purpose of channels, strange architecture. All of this is part of an infrastructure that operated using technologies inaccessible to us. And when the connection was broken, when those in power disappeared or left, the system stopped functioning. The locals discovered abandoned buildings and began to use them in their own way. They transformed the base into a monastery. They started to worship there a god, not understanding that this place initially served entirely different purposes. And there are many such places. Baalbek, Easter Island, Solovki. All of these are nodes of a single network. Power stations, lighthouses, communication centers. They functioned together, forming a system that spanned the entire world. Then the system collapsed. Whether due to a catastrophe a war, or simply the departure of those who had created it. The megaliths remained standing, but no longer fulfilled their functions. They turned into monuments, into enigmas, into objects of worship. And we, the new inhabitants of the planet, walk by and don't understand what we are looking at. Why does official science stubbornly deny all of this? Why do any attempts to propose alternative explanations meet with such resistance? Because acknowledging the truth would shatter the entire worldview that has been constructed for us. If the megaliths were not built by primitive peoples, but by a highly advanced civilization, then the history of humankind appears in a completely different light. So, we are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are not the smartest or the most technologically advanced beings to have ever lived on Earth. We are merely settlers who have taken over foreign cities after the true inhabitants have departed. This is a blow to pride. It is the destruction of the idea of progress. In school, we were taught, humanity is moving slowly but surely forward. From the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, from antiquity to the Middle Ages, from the Industrial Revolution to the digital age. Everything is getting better, more complex, more perfected. But if there was already a civilization before us that built things we cannot replicate now, then progress is an illusion. It means there are setbacks. There are declines. It happens that knowledge is lost, technologies are forgotten, and humanity regresses to a lower level. And if it happened once, it can happen again. That is precisely why the system is not pleased with the truth about the megaliths. If people find out that their history has been falsified, they will start asking questions. Who falsified it? Why? What else is being hidden? And the main question is, who are we really? Perhaps we are descendants of those who built the megaliths. Our ancestors possessed technologies that allowed them to manipulate massive weights, soften stone, and construct structures capable of withstanding millennia. Then a rupture occurred. Not just the destruction of cities, but a break in the transmission of knowledge. Imagine, a master possesses the technology to soften stone. He knows the proportions of the mixtures, the temperatures, the sequence of actions. But there is no place to record this. The paper has burned in the fires. The libraries are flooded. He teaches his students orally. Then the master passes away. The students remember the process partially. Their students remember even less. After 3 generations, only a vague legend remains about how the ancestors knew how to make stones soft. And the new rulers exploited this gap in memory. They rewrote history. They declared the megaliths to be the work of primitive tribes or a divine miracle. They created religions that explained everything as the will of the gods, rather than through technology. It's easier to control. If people believe that their ancestors were savages, they won't seek the lost knowledge. They will accept what is given to them and be grateful for the crumbs of progress. But the stones remain silent and wait. They will not vanish. They cannot be rewritten like a book. The megaliths stand and pose questions to everyone who is willing to see them. How much does the block weigh that you cannot move? How long does it take to process granite by hand? How many people are needed to build something like that over several years? Count, compare, and you'll see that the numbers don't add up. And when the numbers don't add up, it means there is a lie somewhere. Let's return to the technical side of the matter. Look at the photographs of the blocks in the temple at the third pyramid of Giza, the Pyramid of Menkaure. Each stone shows a characteristic edge around the sides. A protrusion several centimeters wide runs along the perimeter of the block. Officially, they are called alignment traces. Supposedly, the builders initially roughly hewed the stone, leaving protrusions, and then were supposed to smooth them down. But for some reason, they didn't erase them. Did they forget? Did they run out of time? Or did they decide that this would be good enough? It sounds strange. If you are building a pyramid for a pharaoh, you perfect every detail, especially since other parts of the pyramid are polished to perfection. Why leave unfinished blocks? And now look at the blocks in Ephesus, Turkey. There are marble stones with the exact same edging, the same protrusion along the edges, the same thickness, the same shape. Egypt and Turkey. Different countries, different eras, different materials. In Giza, granite. In Ephesus, marble. But the border is the same. If this is an alignment trace, why is it identical in constructions separated by thousands of kilometers? Why did builders in completely different cultures make the same mistake? Or it's not a mistake. It's part of the technology. Imagine that the block wasn't carved from solid stone. It was cast in a mold. A mixture of softened rock was prepared and poured into the form. The mold consisted of wooden boards, held together at the edges by a frame. When the material hardened, the frame was removed, leaving an imprint where it had come into contact with the surface of the block. A protrusion that we now refer to as the edging. This explains the identity of the traces. The formwork was made according to a uniform standard. The frame had a specific thickness and a specific profile. No matter where the blocks were cast, the result was the same. And this explains why the edge wasn't removed. It didn't interfere. The blocks were stacked on top of each other, the edges aligned, and the structure turned out to be sturdy. Why waste time on polishing when everything functions properly? Anyone who has worked with concrete will recognize this trace. When pouring the mix into the mold, overflow occurs along the edges of the form. After removing the mold, these remain. If a perfectly smooth surface is needed, they are ground down. If not, they are left as is. Ancient builders did the same thing. However, instead of cement, they used geoconcrete, a mixture based on softened rock. They added binding components, poured it, and waited for it to set. The result was a stone, indistinguishable from natural stone, but artificially created. This technology resolves all contradictions. There's no need to chisel granite, no need to haul multi-ton blocks. You prepare the mixture on site, pour it into a mold of the desired size, and let it set. Quick, efficient, and technological. And most importantly, this explains why the blocks fit together so perfectly. If you pour the next block right up against the previous one, you get a seamless joint. The materials fuse at the molecular level. A seam simply does not form. Take a look at the polygonal masonry in Peru. The stones fit together like puzzle pieces. The seams are virtually non-existent. How is it possible to achieve this if you cut the stones separately and then fit them together? It's impossible. Even with modern tools, achieving such precision is unrealistic. The stone does not have a perfect density. It contains microcracks and irregularities. Cutting a complex shape with millimeter precision in a material that can splinter at any moment is an unachievable task. But they did it. And not just in one place. But if you pour a flexible material into the gap between the already installed blocks, the task becomes easier. The material takes the shape of the gap by itself. It hardens, resulting in a perfect fit. This is exactly how it was done in Sacsayhuaman, on Easter Island, in Ollantaytambo. Everywhere we see polygonal masonry without seams. This is not the craftsmanship of stonemasons. This is a molding technology. And if such technology existed, then a civilization that possessed it must have existed as well. A civilization that was spread across the entire world. Because we find traces of the same technology on different continents. In Egypt, they cast the blocks for the pyramids. In Peru, they shaped the walls of fortresses. In China, they created megaliths in quarries. The same principle everywhere. The same level of knowledge everywhere. It was not a primitive culture that had only learned to work with stone. It was a highly advanced engineering civilization that understood chemistry, physics, and materials science. They knew how to alter the properties of rock, how to control the hardening process, and how to create structures that would last for millennia. And then all of this was lost. Knowledge disappeared. Only the results remained. Megaliths, pyramids, fortresses. And we look at them, not understanding how it was done. Textbooks say, the ancients were patient. They chiseled stone for years. But that's not an explanation. It's an excuse. Because patience alone cannot create geometrically precise blocks weighing hundreds of tons. Knowledge is needed. Technology is needed. And it existed. We just don't remember it. Now think about this. If the megaliths were created by a single civilization around the world, what happened to it? Why did it disappear? There are two versions. The first is a catastrophe. Fast, global, annihilating much of the population and infrastructure. The second is war. Targeted destruction of those who possessed the technologies. Both versions can be true at the same time. First, the catastrophe weakened civilization. It destroyed cities, disrupted communications, and obliterated centers of knowledge. And then came those who took advantage of the situation. They finished off the weakened. They seized territories. They rewrote history. The traces of the catastrophe are visible everywhere. Cities buried under meters of soil, buildings whose ground floors are now underground, ruins covered by mud flows. This is not the buildup of cultural layers over millennia. It is the result of a singular event. Mud flood, a massive mass of liquid clay that has covered the land. Where did it come from? Perhaps from melting glaciers. Maybe from volcanic eruptions. Possibly from rising sea levels. There is no exact answer, but the consequences are clear. After such a blow, the survivors found themselves in ruins. Their knowledge, recorded on fragile media, was lost. Libraries were flooded. Archives were destroyed. The masters who held the secrets of technologies had passed away. There was no one to pass on the knowledge to the next generations. And at that moment, new masters appeared. Those who had not suffered from the catastrophe, or had suffered less. They came to the liberated lands, occupied the surviving cities, declared themselves saviors and rulers. They didn't need the truth about the past. They needed a convenient legend, a legend in which they are the creators of civilization, not conquerors. A legend in which everything was built by them or their recent ancestors. Therefore, the megaliths were declared ritual structures. The platforms became pagan altars. The channels were labeled religious symbols. Everything was given a new meaning, detached from its actual functions. Inconvenient discoveries were destroyed. Quarries were filled in. Roads were erased. Documents were burned. Everything that could reveal the truth disappeared. Instead, new books were being written. Textbooks where history began with the Dark Ages and barbarian tribes, where progress was slow and gradual, where people lived in caves, then learned to build huts, then houses, then palaces. A beautiful, linear picture, clear, convenient, just not corresponding to the facts. Because the megaliths tell a different story. They say there was a leap, there was a high point, and then a fall. And now we are slowly climbing back, thinking we are ascending for the first time. But the stones remember. They stand in silence. They wait for when we are ready to listen. Take another look at the old maps. Until the mid-19th century, a vast territory called Tartaria was marked on maps of Asia. From the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, from the Arctic Ocean to the borders of India and China. This is not a desert. Cities, rivers, and mountains are marked on the maps, a whole empire. Then the maps change. The name disappears. The territory is divided into small regions. Tartary vanishes from textbooks as if it never existed. Historians assert that it was merely a geographical convention. Europeans referred to the unknown lands in the East in this way. No empire existed there. Disparate nomadic tribes lived in that region. But archaeology shows otherwise. In the Siberian taiga, in the steppes of Kazakhstan, and in the Altai Mountains, foundations of large stone structures are being found. Not yurts of nomads, not wooden houses. Stone buildings, sometimes megalithic. They are not displayed in museums. They are not included in official reports, because they do not fit into the worldview where Siberia has always been a wild frontier, inhabited by primitive tribes. What if Tartaria really existed? What if it was that very civilization that built the megaliths? And it was destroyed, erased from the maps, its history rewritten. Traces are visible not only in stones, but also in language. The Russian language contains words that do not have a Slavic root. Their origin is unclear. Linguists throw up their hands. But these words exist, and they hint at contacts with a culture we know nothing about. The architecture of Russian cities is also peculiar. Buildings that are clearly not from the 19th century, yet are officially dated to that period. Palaces that look as though they are several centuries older than what the plaques indicate. And again the question arises, where did the resources come from? How does a feudal state, where the majority of the population was engaged in agriculture at a primitive level, suddenly build dozens of luxurious cities with majestic architecture? The logic doesn't work. The economy doesn't add up. Unless these cities were built before the reforms, before serfdom, built by that civilization which possessed megalithic technologies. And then the new masters arrived. They occupied the ready-made cities, set up their garrisons, hung new signs, and declared all of it their own construction. History is rewritten by the victors. This is a well-known truth. Yet for some reason, we think it only applies to minor conflicts. In reality, it operates on a global scale as well. Entire civilizations can be erased from memory if one controls the sources of information. This is why megaliths are so important. They cannot be rewritten. They cannot be edited. They simply stand there. And by their existence, they refute the official narrative. Each block weighing hundreds of tons poses a question. How was it created? How was it moved? What is the purpose of such size? Every perfectly fitted masonry without seams is a challenge. Try to replicate it. Try to explain how it's done with primitive tools. Every quarry with abandoned megaliths is a mystery. Why were they left unfinished? Where did the builders go? And the more such questions there are, the harder it is to maintain the lie. Because a lie requires consistency, and facts contradict it at every turn. Let's summarize. What do we have? Megaliths around the world, built using a unified technology. Quarries where colossal blocks were cut or cast. Traces of a catastrophe that buried cities. A civilization vanished from the maps. A rewritten history that does not explain the discovered facts. All these are pieces of one puzzle. When you put them together, a picture emerges. It's not complete, not perfectly clear, but enough to understand. We were lied to. There was an advanced civilization. It possessed technologies that we now deem impossible. It built across the entire world, creating infrastructure that spanned continents. Then something broke. Look at the geological data. A layer of volcanic ash several meters thick, dated to the 17th, 18th centuries, has been found in various locations around the globe. Volcanoes erupted simultaneously on different continents, synchronously. These are not local cataclysms. This is a planetary event. After it, there is a disruption in the soil layers, a sharp change in soil composition, the disappearance of plant remnants of familiar species, mass burials. New people came to the liberated territories. They occupied the remaining buildings. Some were dismantled for construction materials. Others were repurposed for their own needs. And the history was rewritten as if they had built everything themselves. Inconvenient evidence was destroyed. Careers were buried. Megaliths were declared ritual objects. Any attempts to find alternative explanations were suppressed. Official science drilled into people's minds the idea that anything that doesn't fit into the textbook is mere fantasy. But the megaliths remain. There are too many of them. They cannot be hidden. They stand and ask questions. And with each passing year, more and more people start to ask these questions. They begin to calculate, compare, and verify. And they see the numbers don't add up. It is impossible to build pyramids in 20 years if each block requires months of work. It is impossible to move 1,000-ton stone without modern equipment. It is impossible to create polygonal masonry without gaps by cutting stones separately. The word impossible is repeated too often, and each time the official narrative responds, but they manage to do it somehow. So it is possible. We just don't know how. A comfortable position. Not to explain, but to reference the unknown patience and skill of the ancients. But people are starting to stop buying these explanations because they see the contradictions, they see the lies, and they begin to search for the truth. Perhaps that is why the system is so concerned about alternative versions of history, not because they are supposedly unscientific, but because they undermine the foundation of control. If people find out that their ancestors were not savages, but representatives of an advanced civilization, their self-perception will change. They will stop feeling like the last link in evolution. They will understand that they have already reached a peak before and can return there. And this is dangerous for those in control, because it is easier to govern when people feel weak, dependent, in need of protection and guidance. But the truth cannot be hidden forever. The stones will not disappear. The megaliths will continue to stand. And everyone who looks at them without bias will see what we see. These are not ritual structures. These are not the temples of savages. These are the remnants of a highly advanced civilization that existed here before us. And we have the right to know about it, the right to know our past, the present, not a made-up one. Megaliths are a message from those who lived before us. They could not write their history on paper. The paper has burned. They could not leave it in books. The books have been destroyed. But they left it in stone, because stone cannot be destroyed. And now our task is to learn how to read this message, to understand what they wanted to tell us, to remember what they made us forget. Maybe then we can reclaim the lost knowledge, restore the technologies, rise to the level our ancestors were at. Maybe we will recognize that we shouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past, that the path they took led to disaster, and we need to seek another one. In any case, truth is necessary. Without it, we are blind. Without it, we repeat others' scripts, not understanding where they lead. Megaliths give us a chance to gain insight, a chance to see who we truly are, where we came from, and where we can go. There is one more aspect worth discussing: careers. We have already talked about Yanshan and Baalbek, but let's take a deeper look. In the Yanshan quarry, traces of work are visible. The walls are scarred with grooves. Official archaeology explains them as scratches from primitive tools. People chipped away at the stone with picks or chisels. For years, decades, they carved out huge blocks, grain by grain. Imagine this process. A man stands before a limestone wall. He holds an iron chisel in his hands. He strikes it with a hammer. A chip the size of a fingernail breaks off. Another hit. Another chip. To carve out a block measuring 2 by 2 meters, several cubic meters of rock must be shattered, piece by piece. How many hits? Millions. How much time? Years. How many people? Dozens if they work simultaneously. And now, multiply that by the number of blocks. There must have been several hundred people working in the mine, every day, for many years in a row. They needed food, water, shelter, tools. Where are the traces of this camp? Where is the dump of broken chisels? Where are the bones of the animals that the workers ate? There is nothing. The quarry stands empty. Only 3 giant blocks lie there, as if someone had left them for a moment and departed forever. There is another explanation. The stone wasn't chiseled. It was softened. A substance was applied to the surface that made the rock pliable. Then, the softened layer was removed. Quickly, efficiently, without millions of strikes. After processing, the rock hardened again. But the traces of the process remained. Those very grooves that are now referred to as scratches. But these are not scratches. They are traces of the tool's movement across the soft mass. If such technology existed, it explains a lot. The speed of work, the accuracy of forms, the absence of mass labor camps. Thousands of people are not needed if the process is automated or requires a small team of specialists. But then the question arises, what is this composition? What components were used? Where did they obtain them? Research shows that certain acids and bases do indeed soften limestone. At the right concentration, the rock becomes similar to clay. Then, when the substance evaporates or neutralizes, the stone hardens again. There are even modern technologies that use this principle. However, they are not applied on an industrial scale. It's expensive, complicated, and requires precise control of the process. It's simpler to blast the rock with dynamite and cut the blocks with diamond blades. But the ancients did not have dynamite or diamond discs. However, they could have knowledge of chemical processes. They might have known recipes for compositions that we have lost. Alchemy. It is commonly believed that it was a pointless endeavor of charlatans trying to turn lead into gold. But what if alchemy was concerned with something entirely different? Studying the properties of substances, methods of material transformation, processing techniques. Medieval alchemical treatises are written in symbolic language. They cannot be understood literally. But if real chemical processes are hidden behind the symbols, then these books serve as technical manuals, guides that we don't know how to read. Because we've lost the key to the symbols, those who possess this knowledge created megaliths. They softened stone, shaped blocks, and built structures that still stand today. Now let's return to the balancing stones and look at them from another perspective. Let's assume that this is not just a demonstration of skill. Let's assume that these are markers, signs pointing to something important. In ancient cultures, there was a tradition of marking significant places with stones. Menhirs, dolmens, cromlechs. All these structures stand there for a reason. They are tied to geographic points, to lines that connect places of power. Balancing stones also stand at certain points. If plotted on a map, lines emerge. Chains of stones stretching across continents. Coincidence? Or system? Imagine that each of these stones is a node in a network that spanned the planet, an energy network through which information or power was transmitted. Sounds fantastic, but remember, megaliths are often located on tectonic fault lines. In places where the magnetic field is anomalous, where unusual energy readings are recorded. Coincidence? Or did the ancients know these places and build there intentionally? If so, then the megaliths are not just structures. They are elements of a global infrastructure. An infrastructure that operated with an energy we are only just beginning to grasp. Atmospheric electricity, etheric streams, telluric currents. All these concepts were once part of science. Then they were declared pseudoscience, removed from textbooks, forgotten. But the ancients utilized these phenomena. They constructed structures that captured energy. They accumulated it. They distributed it. They created a system of free energy supply. That is exactly why cathedrals have such strange designs. The domes are resonators. The spires are antennas. The stained glass windows are frequency modulators. All of this worked together, creating an effect that we can no longer reproduce. The megalithic platforms served as the foundation for these systems. The massive blocks were not needed for strength in the conventional sense. They acted as stabilizers, dampening vibrations and grounding the structures. This is why the Baalbek platform required blocks weighing 800 tons. Not because there was a heavy temple on top, but because initially there was a power station there that generated powerful fields or vibrations, and the foundation had to endure that. When the system stopped functioning, temples were built on the existing foundation. They used what was left, unaware of the original purpose. The same goes for Easter Island. The Ahu platforms are not altars. They are bases for devices that have long been dismantled or destroyed. The Moai statues were possibly part of a system, not idols for worship, but functional elements. Antennas, transmitters, relays. This is why they are so massive. This is why they were placed at certain points. This is why, on an island with almost no resources, efforts were spent on creating hundreds of statues. It's not a religion, it's a technology. Let's return to the Solovetsky Islands. 90 channels are not a water supply for the monks. They are remnants of a hydraulic system, a system that used water not for drinking, but for other purposes. Water conducts electricity. Water resonates at specific frequencies. Water accumulates energy. If a system of channels is built to connect lakes and streams is passed through them, a giant battery effect can be created. Granite blocks covering the channels served as insulators or conductors, depending on the material. Granite contains quartz. Quartz has piezoelectric properties. When compressed or vibrated, it generates an electric current. If the blocks are placed correctly and water flows through them, creating pressure, the system works. It generates energy. It powers devices on the island. That is why the blocks are so carefully processed and laid underwater. They are not decorative. They are functional. Every edge, every seam matters for the operation of the system. When the system stopped, the water in the channels stagnated. The monks came, saw the ready structures, and concluded that these were ancient aqueducts. They repaired part of it, added bricks, and used it for their own needs, not realizing that before them lay the remnants of a technological complex. The same thing happens all over the world. Megaliths have been repurposed. Power plants transformed into temples. Communication hubs into fortresses. Hydraulic systems into irrigation channels. All of this used to work. Now it stands silently, waiting for us to understand. The last question: why aren't we told about this? Why does official science cling so stubbornly to the version of primitive tribes and ritual structures? Because the truth is dangerous. If people find out that free energy was once available to everyone, they will ask the question, why are we now paying for every kilowatt? If they find out that the technologies were cleaner and more efficient than they are now, they will ask, why are we burning oil and coal, poisoning the planet? If they realize that the knowledge was lost intentionally, they will want to know who did it and why. And there are no convenient answers to these questions. It's easier to say, the ancients were savages. They knew nothing. We are smarter. We are more advanced. And everything we have is the pinnacle of progress. Lies are convenient. The truth is uncomfortable. That's why the truth is hidden. Megaliths are declared mysteries that can never be solved. Alternative theories are mocked. Researchers who ask uncomfortable questions are ignored or discredited. But with each passing year, more people are seeing the truth. Because the megaliths cannot be hidden. They stand tall. They ask questions. And the answers to those questions dismantle the official narrative. Perhaps that is why in recent decades, so many monuments are declared protected areas. They are closed to visitors. Access for researchers is restricted, under the pretext of preservation. In reality, it's to have fewer people seeing it, fewer asking questions, fewer checking the official versions. But information cannot be stopped. Photos, videos, research are spreading. People are exchanging data, comparing facts, and they see discrepancies. They see that we were lied to, and they continue to lie. Whether we seize the opportunity to discover the truth depends solely on us, on our willingness to see rather than close our eyes, on our readiness to ask questions rather than accept ready-made answers. The megaliths wait. They have stood for centuries. They will stand longer. But our time is limited. With each generation, memory weakens. The connection to the past frays. A little longer, and we will completely forget who our ancestors were. Either we will remember, we will gather the shards of truth, we will restore the picture, and we will see that we are not the first, not the smartest, and not the pinnacle of evolution. We are the heirs of a great civilization, a civilization that possessed knowledge we have lost, that built things we cannot replicate, that fell but left behind traces. And these traces are megaliths. They will not disappear. They will stand tall and continue to ask questions. Whether we will answer them remains to be seen. For now, we can take the first step. Stop accepting official versions at face value. Start checking facts independently. View the megaliths not as ancient ruins, but as technological structures. Ask the right questions. How much does the block weigh? How much time is needed to create it using available tools? How many people were involved? Where did the resources come from? What happened to the traces of these operations? These simple questions undermine the official version, because the answers to them do not fit within the confines of the textbook. And the more such questions we ask, the clearer the picture will become. A picture of a world where we are not the first, where greatness existed before us, where knowledge was present and has been lost. This is not a reason for despair. It's a reason for hope. Because if knowledge once existed, it can be restored. If technologies existed, they can be created anew. Megaliths show us what is possible. They prove that humans are capable of more than we are told. Capable of building structures that endure for millennia. Capable of creating systems that harness the energy of nature. Capable of reaching heights that we currently can only dream of. And maybe one day we will return there. We will return to the level where our ancestors were. Or we will rise even higher, avoiding the mistakes that led them to their downfall. But for that, we need to remember. Remember that we didn't start from scratch. Remember that a great history stands behind us. Hidden, perhaps, distorted, but real. Megaliths are a bridge to this story, a bridge that cannot be destroyed. And if we walk across it, we will see the truth about who we were and who we can become again.